Welcome back, and if you are following the other two videos, I'm walking through for my students problems that are in Skills Test 7 from Chapter 7. And this one I'm labeling Veruca Salt because they want it all, they want it now, and they want it all, just like Miss Salt did in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So instead of giving you specific angle measures, they want you to give them a general equation that accounts for all angle measures that are solutions to this equation. And I have picked a real nice one. Or, well, I think it's nice, and I guess, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I think this is beautiful, just like me. So, without any further ado, let's talk about the equation at hand. The equation is number 29 from, again, the Chapter 7 Skills Test number 7, and it reads -3 minus cosine negative theta plus pi over 4 equals, get ready for this one now, -6 minus root 3 over 2 minus 2 cosine negative theta plus pi over 4. Yes, if you saw this thing in a dark alley, you would definitely want to walk in the other direction. So let's make it a little bit more pretty so it looks more like me. And what we're going to do is we're going to employ substitution. And we're going to say let f, the reason I chose F is that if you don't follow along, you may get this grade on the test, but I'm just kidding, Anyhow, so let F equal negative theta plus pi over 4. Then we're going to go back and we're going to replace our negative theta plus pi over 4 with F. So it'll be, our problem will read -3 minus cosine of F equals the gargantuan fraction from Hades minus 2 cosine of, again, F. Now, it's a little bit more manageable, so for those of you who watched the other video, you probably can guess what I'm going to do. I'm going to isolate my cosine function. So again, we treat our trigonometric functions as variables. So remember when we were solving our polynomial equations, we would isolate the variables. So we're going to isolate the trig function. And the way we do that is we're going to add 2 cosine F to both sides. And we're going to get -3 plus cosine F equals -6 minus root 3 over 2, dun dun dun. And the -2 cosine F and the 2 cosine F's cancel. So we've still not fully isolated the whole entire function, so we have to add 3 to both sides. And when we add 3 to both sides, we get cosine F equals -6 minus root 3 over 2 plus 3. And again, -6 minus root 3 over 2, it is not a pretty function, to say the least. It's not going to win any, prom pageants, if you will. So we're going to clean it up by adding 3 to it. And we're going to treat 3 like a fraction by putting it over 1. And remember, when you add and subtract fractions, you have to find the common denominator, in which case my common denominator will be 2. So my problem on the right-hand side will be -6 minus root 3 over 2 plus 6 over 2. Now, if you do the addition, you get cosine f equals the negative 6 and the 6 cancel, and we get negative root 3 over 2. Now, we need to find the angle measure that gives us negative root 3 over 2. So you can look on your unit circle chart to find where cosine is negative root 3 over 2, or for those enlightened, y'all can figure it out by using some deductive reasoning. So remember, we're only dealing with two types of triangles, 45, 45, 90 and 30, 60, 90, and cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So we're going to ignore the negative portion part right now and just deal with the root 3 over 2. So the adjacent side is root 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Well, if the adjacent is root 3, that means my opposite side has to be 1, and through the Pythagorean theorem. Now, what angle measure gives me an opposite side of 1? Again, remember from geometry, the side with the smallest length is opposite the angle with the smallest measure. So since 1 is the smallest side, it's opposite the angle of the 30, 60, 90, which is the smallest measure, which is 30 degrees. So the theta would be 30 degrees, which if we changed it into radians would be pi over 6. For those of you who forgot how to convert degrees into radians, you just multiply the degrees times pi over 180 and reduce the fraction. Now, we're still not there yet, because pi over 6 is what the cosine would be if it was in the first quadrant, and cosine's positive in the first quadrant, but we're dealing with negative root 3 over 2. Well, remember from our previous discussion that cosine is positive in the first and the fourth quadrant. The sine function and the tangent function are positive in the second and third quadrant respectively. That means the cosine function is negative in both of those quadrants. So what is pi over 6 equivalent form in the second quadrant? Well, to find that, we subtract pi minus pi over 6, and remember from our previous discussion that if you're not comfortable with using pi's everywhere, and like who wouldn't be happy with a lot of pi's, you can replace pi with 1 for the time being in your mind. So instead of saying pi minus pi over 6, you can go 1 minus 1/6, which will give you 5/6 or 5 pi over 6. So in the second quadrant, my angle measure that will give me a cosine of negative root 3 over 2 would be 5 pi over 6 plus 2n pi. Well, why 2n pi? Because remember, the period of cosine is 2 pi. Now, cosine is not only negative in the second quadrant, but in the third quadrant as well. To find the analogous angle to pi over 6 in the third quadrant, we add pi. So it will be pi plus pi over 6, or 1 plus 1/6, which is 7/6. So our other angle measure that gives us the same value will be 7 pi over 6 plus 2n pi. Now I made a little bit of a mistake here in my notation. What we actually solved for was not theta, but we actually solved for f. Okay? So now we go back to our substitution that we made earlier, and remember we said let f be negative theta plus pi over 4. So now we're going to go back and resubstitute and say negative theta plus pi over 4 equals 5 pi over 6 plus 2n pi. And we do the same thing here. Negative theta plus pi over 4 equals 5 pi over 6, oops, sorry, mistake, 7 pi over 6 plus 2n pi. Now, we now solve for theta like it was a variable. So how do we do that? So we just subtract pi over 4 from both sides and get negative theta equals 5 pi over 6 minus pi over 4, or 5/6 minus 1/4. Well, remember we have to find the common denominator, which is going to be 12. So 5/6 translates to 10/12, and 1/4 translates to 3 over 12. So 10/12 minus 3/12 is 7/12, or 7 pi over 12, plus 2n pi. Okay, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to subtract pi over 4 again from both sides, and again we have the same situation. 7 pi over 6 minus pi over 4. Now, again, instead of dealing with pi, we can just say 7/6 minus 1/4, which means we have to find again a common denominator, which is 12, and 7/6 translates to 14 over 12, and 1/4 again translates to 3 over 12. So 14 over 12 minus 3 over 12 is 11 over 12. So we get negative theta equals 11 over 12, 11 pi over 12, plus 2n pi. Okay, so hopefully everyone has followed along with me up to now. If not, you can reverse this video and watch it over again and how I got to these two answers. And now we're still not done. We have a negative theta. So in order to get rid of the negative, we have to multiply both sides of the equation by -1. So we multiply the left-hand side by -1, and we multiply the entire right-hand side by -1. And our answer becomes theta equals -7 pi over 12 minus 2n pi. And this side, when we do on the right hand side, when we do the same thing, we multiply through by negative, we get theta equals -11 pi over 12 minus 2n pi. So our solution, if you will be, general solution will be -7 pi over 12 minus 2n pi, comma, -11 pi over 12 minus 2n pi. And if we wanted specific angles, then we would substitute the n with numbers until we got angle measures that were between 0 and 2 pi, and that would be our specific answers within a confined domain between 0 and 2 pi. But for our case, since these equations are like Veruca Salt, they want all the answers and they want it now, this is where you would stop, because you now have a general formula for all of the equations. So what does it say here? What does this mean? It says that all angles that are -7 pi over 12 and any coterminal angles of -7 pi over 12 will meet this criteria, and all angle measures that are -11 pi over 12 and -7 pi over 12 minus 2n pi will also give you the same answer. And from our selection, our answer to this would be D, because we have none of these to choose from. I hope this video helped and hope to talk to you soon on the next video. Thank you.